I think it's a massive conspiracy theory. I reckon, so TfL have done this 24-hour service on a Friday and Saturday nights on the tubes, and they figured out not enough people are using it, so they want to kill the Uber competition off,
so they're basically
people start
trying to
using
manipulate the market in favour of their own service. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Just a reminder that if you're watching this on video on the site, you can also download or stream it from SoundCloud or iTunes, and vice versa. If you're streaming it, you can watch it on the site. This week I have got Jamie, who's back from Amsterdam.
How you doing, Scott?
All right, mate. And Ian, who's back from last week. Ian from Light Reading, I should hasten to add. And this week we're going to be talking about Uber over. Uber getting kicked out of London. Content offensive, Deutsche Telecom getting into the original programming game, and HTC later. Yes, I know. Google buying a great big chunk of HTC because it can. So, Ian, you wrote up the Uber thing. So basically, Transport for London's gone, no, I'm not happy. Yep. Why don't you tell us a bit about what their rationale is?
Well, it's a bit of a shock, obviously, because
right.
I don't think anybody was expecting this to happen. I think that their current operating licence in London is due to end on September the 30th.
Right. And
Transport for London has come out and said they're not going to renew it.
Yeah.
Which is, so it's a week away.
Right.
For anybody who uses Uber, there's no reason to panic because Uber's appealing the decision,
right.
And they'll be allowed to carry on
Ubering
as normal while that appeals process sort of runs its course.
Right.
But yeah, Transport for London's statement is pretty scathing. It basically said that they're not fit and proper, I think was the wording they used, to be
very English, isn't it?
Not fit and proper to be a private hire.
They're just not decent
license operator.
Yes.
Yeah, and they sort of have a number of reasons for that. They don't think they're sort of complying with various regulations to do with things like healthcare and law enforcement.
Right.
They've got concerns over this Grable software,
right,
which I think has kind of got Uber into trouble a bit in the US. Good question. I don't know exactly, but I think Grable allows them to sort of look at data to do with where drivers might be, for example.
Okay.
And it has other information that wouldn't sort of be available to the consumer using the app. But in the US,
the one that constantly runs, even though
it constantly runs. But what they did in the US is they seem to allegedly provide a version of this to the regulators that kind of didn't give them all the information, if you see what I mean. It sort of hid some things from the
I read it also enables them to sort of go under the radar a bit, perhaps in places where it's not, where there's a low tolerance for things like Uber.
Exactly. And Grable is specifically cited in TfL's statement, and they seem to be worried that this could have consequences to do with things like law enforcement and making it harder for officials to do their jobs.
That's what I got from it, is that they feel that Google's unaccountable, and
Uber.
Uber is unaccountable to the authorities or to wherever it is, and that they're not too happy with the level of vetting and scrutiny of the drivers. I got no idea what the level of vetting and scrutiny is for minicab drivers or black cab drivers.
Well, I think that the interesting thing is that more companies, Uber's not unique. As these internet companies pop up and become more powerful, it's sort of changing the way that people work. My own wife works for a similar type of organisation.
Right.
She's a sports massage therapist.
Okay.
But it's very much like Uber. You kind of book to have an appointment, and she's not on their payroll.
Right.
She's
the
gone
gig
through
economy.
It's the gig economy. She's gone through checks, and she's had to prove that she's kind of qualified. But it's not at all as rigorous as you would expect somebody coming and working full time for Informer, say, to go through. And I think,
wonder what kind of checks when someone's going to come on and basically feel you up. What kind of checks there should be? But anybody can sort of sign up to be an Uber driver. I don't know what the process is exactly, but it's probably not as rigorous as what a London minicab driver would go through. Indeed. Where they have to pass various tests that they call the knowledge, I think, to do with. So that's knowledge. That's sort of competence in your job. But
competence in your job, but then also
more about safety and security,
which are also to do with normal employment regulations, I guess.
Yeah.
And as more and more people move to this gig economy model where they're casual workers or they're on contracts, I think it becomes there are concerns about whether things are regulated well enough. And the other thing it shows is, which is to do with that, I guess, is just this kind of clash that's now developing between, especially in Europe, between sort of regulatory officials and the big internet players.
Yes, totally.
It's just it's more evidence of that. There's more and more concern about the growing might of these companies. 3 or 4 big companies seem to have enormous power over the way we live our lives now, and they seem to be sort of beholden to no one. And increasingly you see regulators trying to sort of rein them in and getting concerned about that.
And the pretext they often give is security.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're at a time where, especially in Western Europe, we're getting terrorist incidents on quite a fairly regular basis. And in terms of so Uber's one thing that they perhaps want to be able to track the drivers, see if any of them are dodgy. But then you talk about other internet companies like Google or Facebook or whatever. They're concerned with the flow of communication and information. Where some of these nutters are getting their ideas from and all that sort of thing. And I was reading something quite recently about if we treat, let's say, Facebook as a publisher, just as we're a publisher and we're responsible for putting stuff up. Jamie and I had a very constructive, robust discussion as to what the dividing lines should be for publication just today. And we have to be quite rightly held responsible for what we put up. And then there's a slightly more grey area where are we responsible for the comments in the comments section? But I suppose if someone put up something really out of order, it would be incumbent on us to sort of delete it, even though you could argue that's a bit censorious and it suddenly makes us the arbiter of sort of free speech. And then you get over to a social media platform and, well, this is starting to change, but in their inception, they don't produce any original content whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it's all third-party content, and they've been able to wash their hands, even though they make money off all that third-party content. They've been able to say it's not our content, so it's not our problem. I think it's just it's a legal dilemma because this is new.
Yeah,
we didn't even 10 years or so ago we didn't have this, so I think they're struggling to get their head around it. But to sort of bring it back to Uber, Jamie, so we've got this tension between innovative internet companies providing new ways of doing business and regulatory authorities freaking out that they feel that they're not in control of them. What do you, for you or people you've spoken to, what do you get a sense? Do you think they should just leave Uber alone, or do you think they're right to sort of clamp down a bit more?
I do think there needs to be some more regulation there. I think at the moment it is a bit of a free-for-all. Like the social media guys, like any of the OTTs, it's going back to the old telco argument is that, the telcos can't compete with the likes of WhatsApp or those sorts of things because they're more heavily regulated in terms of like using advertising data and all that sort of side of things. Yeah. And it's the same when it comes to Uber and black cabs, and it's the same when it comes to Airbnb and to sort of normal hotels or B&Bs and that sort of thing. They're playing to 2 different sets of rules. Yeah. So I get it. There does need to be disruption. And I think ultimately an idea like Airbnb or Uber is very good because it challenges the status quo. Yeah. And ultimately, if we're not happy paying the prices, they're not doing us a service. They're holding us to ransom.
So it's standard free market rationale.
But there doesn't. So I get the free market rationale, but there needs to be a level playing field. At the moment, it's just the Wild West for the internet companies. They can do essentially what they want.
There's also a big impact, obviously, on, as we move to the gig economy and as more people kind of work this way, the knock-on effect is that a lot of people who kind of make their living as Uber drivers all of a sudden today are thinking, oh my God, what does this mean? And it's quite a lot. It's about, according to Uber, it's about 40,000, I think.
Yeah,
in London alone.
40,000 drivers in London, and apparently they say, I think it's 3.5 million who, those are people who downloaded the app, so maybe not all of them are using it.
I think it's a massive conspiracy theory. I reckon, so TfL have done this 24-hour service on a Friday and Saturday nights on the tubes, and they figured out not enough people are using it, so they want to kill the Uber competition off.
So they're basically
people
trying
start
to manipulate
using
the market in favour of their own services.
And the black cab drivers obviously been lobbying against.
Well,
Uber
quite.
For a long,
the other
time.
thing, whether or not it's their own interests or whether it's special interests, such as the black cabbies.
I mean, that's common throughout Europe, and actually, I think the European Commission took a decision in May that or made moves to regulate Uber as saying it should be regulated as a transport company rather than an internet player, because it's a curiosity that it's described as the world's biggest taxi company, but it doesn't have doesn't own any of its own vehicles, apart from perhaps some of the ones that it's using for
there's a lot of
driving.
But that's slightly suspect in the same time, in that they provide like finance plans for their drivers to buy vehicles as well. Because I think there was a documentary on the BBC about sort of Uber launching in India, and I'm not saying whether it's true or not or anything like that, but the ultimate, when you actually look at what the BBC journalist actually said, he was like, the Indian people are being screwed by Uber,
right?
Because they're given these personal finance plans to buy like X amount of, but then when they can't meet the demand, they're still it's still ridiculously high interest rates.
And that's been a long criticism of Uber as well, and the whole gig economy is the rates of pay.
Yeah.
So another one that gets criticised is Deliveroo.
Mm-hmm.
Those guys on bikes who deliver your takeaways for you.
Yeah.
And people talk about 0 hours contracts, and of course generationally, a generation or two ago, you get a job for life. You go and start working at
a lucrative pension at
Smith
the
and
end of
Jones Industries, and 40 years later, you get your golden carriage clock and sort of wither away on your allotment.
Yeah.
Whereas now, people are having to sort of bounce around and be a lot more dynamic, a lot more adaptable, and there's a lot less security.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, the genie's out of the bottle. You can lament it all you want, but that's how it is. On the flip side, that doesn't mean there shouldn't be any protection for workers at all. And it does seem, not that this has been an explicit reason why TfL said, because it's all about safety and security, but I think unspoken is this, they're addressing a more social thing.
Yeah.
And they think Uber's a bit exploitative. I don't know enough about Uber and what it's like to be an Uber driver to make a qualified comment one way or the other.
Well, they've had this is like the latest in a series of pretty, sort of bad news developments for them, isn't it, over the last year? I mean, they've had,
apart from the CEO and his
allegations of sexism. There's this regulatory run-in in the US. There's allegations they've stolen intellectual property from Google. So there's
a general feeling of them playing fast and loose. And I suspect a lot of what we've just been talking about is just clever people finding loopholes in the law.
But I think that's
to make money.
That's just the internet generation.
Do you think Uber's going to survive? I mean,
do I think Uber's going to survive? Yeah, I would have thought so. But I think what it's probably going to have to do, what's probably going to happen in London, for example, is they've got this appeals process. I was reading the quote from their UK general manager, and he was going, "Oh, poor old drivers, oh, poor old punters," like Uber's some kind of charity, which I found disingenuous. But you always have to argue. You can't argue in self-interest. You can't say, "Well, we're outraged because I might not be able to buy a yacht this year," or something like that. But I think what they'll have to do, there'll be all this posturing and all that sort of thing, and behind the scenes, this comes over to me as just a strong negotiating move by TfL, just going, right, you better sort it out, or we're going to renew your license.
It's not just the UK, they can't operate in Denmark.
Yeah, so they're going to have to adapt everywhere. They're going to have to adapt. I mean, clearly they're going to.
It's the first domino. I mean,
I'm wondering if someone else comes along and kind of snatches the initiative because of all
the
other
strong
problems.
Brand, though, isn't it?
I think because you Uber something now. It's like it's
like
it's become it's like
has.
Google in a word. It's a verb, not necessarily a noun anymore. So I think, but I think in 2 years' time, the Uber that will exist will be completely different to what the one is now. I reckon this is the first domino, and if you've got TfL doing it, I reckon another big city in the UK is going to do it before long. Then maybe someone in America, then someone over in France.
Well, they've already been doing it. They've had some grief in San Francisco of all places. Yeah. Silicon Valley.
And all the dominoes will start toppling before too long. Like Uber is going to be a completely different organisation.
So they'll have to get into line, and that will probably mean that that their margins might get a bit squeezed. So they're going to have to slightly adjust their business model because they'll probably have higher overheads with the cost of the vetting and the maintenance and all this extra sort of bureaucratic burden that needs to be placed on them.
If they lose their appeal, it would presumably blow quite a big hole in business. I mean, London's a big city. It's probably one of their biggest markets, I imagine, outside the US. So
yeah, and we were chatting to various sort of friends and relatives, and the main reason people are unhappy with that move is because of how cheap Uber is.
Yeah,
and this is the thing. People might sort of moan about globalization. They might sort of moan about egalitarianism, but they quite like having cheap goods and services. Mm-hmm. So something's got to give. But yeah, I think we're all more or less in agreement. We're not going to be able to indulge producer Pierre and have a big argument about it. We're more or less in agreement that Uber probably will survive, but it's going to have to adapt, I think.
For example, if I can jump
here we go.
Uber and Lyft were banned from Austin, Texas, but they came back
right.
eventually.
Yeah. So
and there was another app in taking all their money in between. So
well, there we are. So I think it's a negotiation. It's probably what's going to happen. So yes. So moving on. Jamie, you were writing. I'm calling this a content offensive. Deutsche Telecom has decided to get into the original content game, which is relatively new for an operator, although loads of people are doing it. And you wrote about that today. Why don't you tell us a bit more?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was just one of the stories, really. I mean, like, obviously last week I was at IBC.
Oh, yes,
and that
of course.
is just all content.
We remembered you on the podcast.
Yeah, oh, thank you very much. No, but I mean, the Deutsche Telecom one, I thought this is actually, aside from the fact that it's original, well, that is the point, aside from the content being a little bit risque, shall we say.
Right.
I think
it's something to do with Germans invading France.
Yeah. Germans are invading France.
I know.
Sounds
we were both
familiar,
thinking,
doesn't
okay,
it?
that's brave.
If only we had John Cleese, yeah.
Yes.
But no, basically, it's a story. French town going bankrupt.
Right.
They lure a German company across along with German workers, and it's the idea of them trying to get along.
Right.
You know, and I think it's a good idea in the fact that it could deep dive into some quite sensitive topics. So
is it meant as a comedy?
I don't know. I got no idea.
I'm wondering if it's sort of modern day LOLO type of thing.
Well, no. I think it's supposed to be quite serious.
Oh, okay, right. But it is meant to be exploring sort of cultural friction, but on the sort of Franco-German basis.
And I think that so as long as they don't sort of like just sort of like skim over the top of those sort of topics, it could be quite a good show.
Yeah.
But I think that is quite interesting in the fact that Deutsche Telekom are actually going into unique content.
Yeah.
And this is something else that was brought up at the conference last week, and something Deutsche Telekom have been doing that I haven't seen a lot of evidence of elsewhere around the world, but I think it could be a really big money maker for the telcos, is they become the super aggregators of content.
Right.
Because this was a topic of conversation which I spoke to a few people at the show last week. Like how many windows do you have to open to get your content? Like, have you got Sky?
Right.
Have you got BT? You got Netflix? You got Amazon? You know, you got all these different windows, all these different sort of like different experiences. You navigate the sites different ways. You know, we have one mobile, or some people have two, but one's work and one's personal. We have one mobile and one operator. Now, why can't they put an app on your phone? And just that app be an aggregator of all the content, build the relationships in the background, and then just sort of try and monetize content that way.
So you've got everything's already logged in. You don't have to then go and navigate through various different browsers. I mean, I think that makes sense. You know, another illustration of that, I know you're talking about mobile, but like at home, we access, for example, Netflix through my son's PlayStation.
Yeah.
So that actually ends up involving three different remote controls. We've got the remote control for the telly, we've got a remote control for the sort of BT box, and then the remote control for the PlayStation. And you have to be an octopus to actually get this stuff going.
Easiest way to do it's on a smart TV.
Well, it is a smart TV.
Control.
But do you know? But this smart TV, for example, can't run Now TV.
Right.
Because for some reason the codec isn't supported by Now TV anyway.
But this is where the super aggregator market sort of could come into play, because there's so much content out there and there are so many different channels. And like you were just saying there, you know, you have to access your Netflix, you have to turn on the TV, you have to turn on the PlayStation, then you have to switch over channel, then you have to log in through the it just takes ages. So why not have, you know, I got this is a Vodafone. So like Vodafone have an app there. You click on the app and then you got like Netflix, then I got my Sky accounts, then I don't know, BBC iPlayer, all that sort of thing, and it's just an aggregator of content all in one place. And I think that is because.
But couldn't an app company do that, you know, or a software player?
But they haven't.
Well, isn't Roku doing that? That's the business model that Roku has.
Right.
But isn't Roku? Didn't they offer it as its own sort of channels?
Well, it didn't
content.
until very, very recently. That was what made it unique, is that it was just a
super aggregator.
Well, it has its devices, it has its kind of set-top boxes and dongles that you that carry the software platform. More recently, not that recently though, it's been just sort of selling software. You know that companies will integrate into their like smart TV makers, for example,
yeah.
and it bundles all the services. You know, it
I
makes it easy to get onto Netflix, onto Amazon.
But the big thing for the operators is that you're talking about something that's in the home there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But how often do you leave the flat with the house without your phone?
Yeah.
I mean, we have a very unique relationship with our smartphones in that they come everywhere with us, and sort of like content can come everywhere with us as well now. So the way that they could tap into this huge content pie is, instead of taking on the content creators who are better at it than the telcos, or taking on the distributors who are better at it than the telcos, why not find their own niche and add value by taking everything and utilising this
and there's
really
the customer
unique
relationship. For as long as I've been doing this job, and I suspect for a long time before that, you could confirm or deny that, Ian, grizzled veteran that you are. People have been banging on about how sort of commoditized operators are, how they, this dumb pipe and all that sort of thing, and how what they should be doing is utilizing the strong customer relationship they have through the billing and through the provision of services and the handset itself and all that sort of thing. To then sell other value add stuff, and I think that's partly what
I mean. That's, to me, that's the way they should kind of approach the TV thing. Really, is sort of being, I guess it's an aggregator in a sense, but really doing deals with. I mean, Orange recently did a deal with Netflix. I think you already had a deal in France, but now you can in other markets.
Right.
So you pay for your Orange subscription, your broadband and TV package, and it includes Netflix as part of that. They've also, bought some sports rights, perhaps, so you can get that through them as well. And you package it up and present it in a way that's easy to understand and competitively priced, and there's one point of contact if something goes wrong. I mean, that to me is I agree. I think the creation side of it is, I just don't see.
But even the distribution side, I just don't think they're that good at it. I mean,
but they are distributors in a way, aren't they?
They are, but it's different in terms of sort of like creating their own channels.
Yeah, sure.
And all that sort of thing.
I agree.
They're not going to be anywhere near as good at distribution as BBC or Fox or something like that.
Yeah.
When you look at even companies as big and omnipotent as Apple.
Yeah.
They're trying to play out of their comfort zone with content, and all the stories I've been reading is that they're kind of blowing it. They're not very good at understanding content creation, at negotiating with the studios, all that sort of thing. Presumably because Apple wants to be a bit control freaky about it, and the studios have seen what happened with music and iTunes and then Spotify, which we can't pin on Apple.
Yeah.
But you could argue that iTunes was the sort of start of that sort of move of control away from the labels. And the studios are understandably worried about that, so they're reluctant to do a deal.
I mean, this goes back. These sorts of arguments go back to one single big bugbear of mine with the telco industry, is that first of all they're not innovative at all,
right?
And they're not willing to take a risk.
Yeah.
So basically, they're going to try and muscle in. Like, the idea of being a super aggregator is finding value that doesn't exist already. They're creating a new level in the value chain.
A new level of service. Yeah.
To do that, you've got to be innovative, and you've got to take a risk, because no one's done it before. So you don't know whether it's going to succeed or fail.
Yeah.
Instead, they're trying to go down and muscle in on other areas where they're gonna lose.
Are you quite sceptical about the DT move then to actually produce its own show?
Do you know? I mean,
Germanized, is it called?
Yeah, Germanized. So this one, I'm quite intrigued by this one, because it, like I said, it's quite a risky content area.
Yeah.
And like I would have thought that, like most people, when they're just first entering into the content area, they go safe, they go like sitcom,
they've gone straight into sort of Franco-German aggro.
They've gone into like
we
a really deep
We should ask
topic.
Producer Pierre, actually, is there comedy to be had in sort of cultural clashes between French and German people?
We've had many comedies.
Yeah.
Although the way that Deutsche Telecom describes it, the way they described it in their blurb does make it sound like there's a humorous element to it, doesn't it? It sort of alludes to.
Well, maybe. I mean,
I can't.
Well, they even had this sort of half jocular. We've had a few misunderstandings in the past.
Exactly.
Well, that's an understatement of the year, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was obviously an allusion to.
Yes, that's a good point.
To make jokes.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing. They've gone deep with,
Yes.
they're not
on one level. Fair play to them.
It's not superficial.
Yeah.
So it's not like the Big Bang Theory. That's not gonna offend anyone, and everyone's gonna have a little giggle at it. They've gone a topic which is is it you reading a level hate? So I think that's an interesting move, but original content for other people, I don't know. I just can't see on the whole it working in the telco.
Well,
No, me neither.
It's really interesting. Everyone seems to be getting into it. Slight tangent, but I've been reading about Facebook bidding for the IPL in India.
Yeah. Well, Amazon
apparently-
bought tennis rights.
Tennis, yeah,
which,
there we go. So Amazon's getting to tennis. I think the chief executive of Man United said, one of someone like Amazon or Facebook will end up buying Premier League stuff.
Yeah.
And all that sort of thing. And of course, BT.
This is something the telcos have already been doing, though, isn't it? I mean, both DT and BT, and I think
All the Ts.
Telefonica. Most of the big European incumbents, I think, have splashed out on sports rights. This is where
that's quite easy because
it's easy, but it
that's
costs
not
a hell of a lot.
program.
it's not an original program. They're buying something that's going to happen.
It's still a hell of. I was
but
saying it's a financial
it costs
risk.
a huge amount of money, and it's
financial
also
risk.
very important because the one linear TV thing I think that people still actually want to see is live sport. Live sports pulls a huge audience, so BT being able to show Premier League matches that no one else can would drive people towards their broadband.
I just can't see how they're going to
gamble,
monetize it though, because so what was it? So it's 1.3 billion that BT paid for the 3-year thing for 3-year rights for the Premier League.
Yeah.
So I was at a wedding a couple of weeks ago, and one of
Your
the
10th one of the year, was it?
a lot of weddings this year.
He's of that age.
But one of the guys who's at the wedding happens to work for Sky. I'm not going to say who it is,
Very
but
discreet
we
of
could
you.
find this out.
yeah.
If Ray was here, he'd be going, say it.
But so he mentioned that the next round of bidding for the Premier League is actually going to be a silent auction, which I didn't realise. So it could go up to what? I mean, how high can it go? Could you put 2 billion in and guarantee that you're going to get the rights, or do you go?
So does silent
3
auction
billion?
mean that you don't know
You
whether
don't know
your
whether
bid's
one's bidding.
the top bid or not?
Sorry, correction. That was 1.2 for the Champions League.
Champions League, sorry, Champions League. Then Champions League. This is what. So yeah, so you get.
But it was a lot for Premier League rights as well, right?
Yeah,
It was,
but mostly for Sky.
Look that one up.
yes.
So you put it. So you put in your envelope and you say, "This is how much I want to pay,"
Right.
and then they look at all the envelopes, and the highest one wins.
You don't know what your competitors are doing.
Could be 500 million, could be
I
50
think it's
quid.
been used in Spectrum auctions in the past,
Right.
and people have gone, "Oh God,
You just wish they'd all get together and go, look, everyone just put 5p in.
This is rubbish. Let's not really bid very much."
But it could be
right.
50p. It could be 5
indeed.
billion.
Okay. And so your point is that the ceiling for a silent auction might be even higher
Yeah,
because people sort of panic and
Yeah.
bid really high.
yeah, it could be. I mean, and then how do you get any form of ROI on that? I mean, I don't care how many bundles you're selling. If you're buying 3 years of the Champions League for 5 billion, that's a
I mean, analysts
fuckload
have
of
been
broadband.
analysts have been worried about BT spending strategy, haven't they, on sports rights? But it does seem to have, I mean, look at the financials and the consumer bit, which is kind of where all that,
It's going in the right
where all that
direction.
goes. It does seem to be doing well. That's the bit really that's kind of
Well, I'm a BT
thriving,
subscriber,
isn't it?
and I get BT TV. Now, obviously, there's a sort of lifestyle element to this. To me, I can very rarely convince my family to let me stick sport on the main telly,
yeah.
as none of the rest of them are interested. But I just don't feel I get BT Sport as thrown in. I don't feel I use it really
It's
hardly
quite-
ever.
It's not. I mean, this comes back to the whole customer service thing, though, as well. I think is that it's not intuitive at all. So I'm the
Right.
same. I'm a BT broadband subscriber.
Yeah, finding those BT
and therefore
channels
you
isn't
don't just turn your
straightforward.
TV on and it starts working. You actually have to phone them up. Then they start going through
Right.
lists of options. It becomes very cumbersome. And then when you decide that you don't want some channels, again you have to go through this long drawn out process. And again, you sign up to Amazon or Netflix. You pay £7 a month. You want to cancel it, you can. It's all online. It's all very straightforward.
This is the
know-
other thing that came up last week, and it's the overselling of rights, and I think this will come to bite someone before too long. In that, if you look at the NFL over in the States, so the NFL, they sell their rights to on I think a Monday. He said something stupid like on a
Amazon's got
Sunday
Thursdays.
and Monday it's on this channel.
Yeah.
Then on a Monday and
There's even some
Thursday it's
Twitter
on
live
this
streaming
channel.
going.
Yeah.
Twitter
Amazon's
live
got
stream
some,
it.
yeah, all
Plus, it can be live streamed on the NFL website as well. So you're not actually, you're selling, you've sold the rights, but you're not capturing the whole audience. You don't know where the audience is.
I
because
think NFL, I'm a long-time American football fan. I've found NFL.com to be a really irritating website. It's very nicely done. There's all the latest technology, but you just get served with video ads. When you so much as move your eyeballs around, you get a new ad served. So the whole experience is incredibly fragmented.
Yes, yeah, but that's sort of like slightly
I know, that's a bit of a side rant.
But so you don't know. So you're buying it for, say, your Twitter. You're saying, right, okay, I'm going to buy the rights for, I don't know, 500 million, just off the top of my head. You're only going to get maximum 10% of the audience, because 10% of them are only 30% of the audience are going to be Twitter users, and then only 10% of those are going to use. So is there any actual value in you buying rights?
Yep.
And then is there any value in the telco buying rights, because they're only buying rights to 50% of the audience? So I just can't see the sports side of things.
It'd be interesting seeing, like you were saying, seeing Amazon going after more sports rights perhaps in the UK, because I think one of the strengths that a company like Amazon has is its ability to kind of combine different offerings. I mean, it's obviously a massive retail company, so it could do things in that market that a telco couldn't do. It could attach. I mean, already you buy a Prime subscription, I think, for £80 a year, which allows you to get anything delivered to your door for nothing. Right. That also includes video.
Yep.
There's all sorts of opportunities. There's a piece actually on light reading.
We're OTT-tastic in the Bachelor household.
There's a light reading story that's gone up last night, I think, written by Mari about this issue that Amazon is now like a massive challenge to cable companies.
Indeed.
So it's quite interesting to see what can happen.
It is, and to sort of summarise that before we move on to the last item, I think we've spoken about this on the pod before, and everyone knows it, that content, we're going through a bit of a sort of land grab for content. There was an old cliche of content is king, and I was sort of like, and not really sure what it means. But I think people understand that the premium content, something like Game of Thrones or live sport, or the latest Hollywood blockbuster or whatever, has a certain kind of audience attracting quality that is very powerful. And now media companies like ours, we realise that actually our product isn't our content. Our product, in terms of the business model, is the audience, and the content is the means. Things like this podcast, if anyone ever listens to it, that is, are a means of attracting and retaining that audience. But the audience is the product. But that used to be to sell them advertising. So, traditional magazines, newspapers, TV channels, it was all about, above the line advertising. But now it's retaining that audience for different purposes, whether it's loyalty to Amazon Prime, or whether it's loyalty to your BBC broadband package, or whatever. But either way, content is still this lure to attract people, and I think it just seems to be getting ever more so. I read that Amazon's original content budget is greater than Netflix and HBO's, which is incredible when you think HBO's dropping about 20 million an episode on Game of Thrones. Yes. So I think that's really interesting. Anyway, we're probably sort of running over a little bit of that, so I'm going to move on to my item, which I'm calling HTC You Later, in a rather cringeworthy sort of dad pun sort of way, and it's in reference to the acquisition by Google of parts of HTC. So we thought Google might just buy HTC, and people were going, are you sure, Google? Because don't you remember you dropped about 13 bill on Motorola a few years back, and that all went ping-tong, and you ended up sort of selling most of it onto Lenovo, and I don't think it's gone particularly well for Lenovo either. But then what happened in the event was that they handed over $1.1 billion to HTC in return for basically the business unit that was concerned with making this Google phone, which is now branded Pixel. It used to be called Nexus back in the day, but it's a Google's own brand phone called the Pixel. And Google, since the Motorola thing, Google's been more proactive about its own brand in a similar way to sort of what Microsoft does with Surface to try and ignite the sort of Windows tablet market. And that seems to be that's the only bit of HTC they wanted. And I think they've learned from the Motorola thing, where a lot of the motivation for buying Motorola when they did was for a bunch of patents, because this is at a time where there was a hell of a lot of suing and counter-suing going on to do with smartphone patents. Microsoft, basically anyone who's an Android licensee has to pay Microsoft money as well because it owned some of the patents that were within Android. We had Oracle suing Google over Java. Apple will have got involved at various times. It was all a bit of a litigation fest. And sometimes with patents, you just have to stockpile them. You just have to have a big pile. I got more patents than you, so I win. It sometimes seems to be as simple as that. So that's why it seemed to do it. But then it ended up buying loads of people and IP and presumably premises and physical assets that it didn't need. So this time it seems to be able to go up to HTC. And let's not forget, HTC sort of 5 or 10 years ago was one of the biggest smartphone brands. But it's since sort of lost out to other Android players such as Samsung, and then all these Chinese companies like Xiaomi and Vivo and Oppo and of course Huawei that are all ahead of it and have greater sort of economies of scale and a bigger domestic market, HTC being Taiwanese. And so they're very diminished compared to what they were before. So my feeling was that Google was basically able to cherry pick the bits of HTC that were useful to it.
Yeah.
And take them away and then go, we don't want the rest.
Yeah.
Now the HTC's market cap at the time was less than 2 billion. So it's paid more than half of the market cap value of HTC for about what's considered to be about a fifth of its workforce.
The best bits, though.
They're probably the best bits, yeah. So my feeling was that Google sort of paid top dollar in order to be able to cherry pick and not burden itself with stuff that it considered to be sort of superfluous to its needs.
And it's saying that it needs these engineers, it needs their expertise to kind of advance its own sort
Pixel
of pixel stuff. Basically.
I mean, it could have just kept going with the OEM relationship that it's got with HTC, so it presumably wants to take it a bit more in-house.
What now for HTC? It doesn't sound
well.
Like
That's
a good deal for
hence
them, really.
hence my crappy pun. I mean, I don't think HTC was coming out with all this stuff in its press release going, this just shows our commitment to smartphones. I was going, you what?
Yeah.
How does getting rid of your best smartphone engineers show your commitment to smartphones? Surely quite the opposite. And I thought there was a little bit of double speak there. We were just talking off camera before we started about when Nokia decided to move its smartphone OS from Symbian to Microsoft. And the CEO at the time, a chap called Stephen Elop, just came out and said it. Went, yeah, sod it, we're scrapping Symbian. So Symbian, which was by far the market leading platform, just dropped off a cliff in the space of about a year. It went from something like more than 50% market share to zero, all because he said that so blatantly. So my feeling, and I've got no corroboration, this is just my analysis, my gut feeling, is that they're trying to sort of sugar the pill a little bit.
Yeah.
And they're probably thinking, look, this isn't happening. Smartphones, that we can't compete with Apple, Samsung, and these Chinese guys. We're going to get out of it. We're going to get what money we can off Google, who've probably been generous. They probably could have screwed them down more in the deal because HTC is not in a strong bargaining position.
But where do you think HTC went wrong? Because is it that they, I mean, obviously, like you said, they don't have the economies of scale, perhaps, of those Chinese players. Is that the sole problem, or is it that, I mean, hardware these days is not perceived to be a particularly sexy business to be in, unless you are doing something else as well, like Apple, for example, which controls everything, and it has the software,
and it's got a sort of unparalleled brand.
Yeah, a lot of these Chinese companies that you mentioned aren't, aside from Huawei, I would say, are not very sexy companies, are they? They're perceived to be sort of commodity firms.
I think so. I don't know what they're like within China, but certainly externally.
HTC was 10 years ago. It would never have sort of sold itself in that way. It was trying to be an innovator.
No, well, I think a big reason, its handsets are always well reviewed, so they're always considered to be well engineered, aesthetically decent, all the latest bells and whistles. I think the biggest thing is marketing. So it's really hard for sort of Android players. So here we are. I've got my Galaxy S7. Jamie's got just lob your phone over here, Jamie. Jamie's got a Motorola. Now, there's not a lot to choose between them, especially if you take off the case I've got on this. They're basically black rectangles, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it's not very radio friendly, this. I should have held it up. And so it's very hard to distinguish between them. So then sometimes it just comes down to sheer marketing grunt, marketing and distribution. And Samsung's obviously a far bigger company than HTC, so it can spend a lot of money on advertising. It can spend a lot of money on sort of persuading operators all over the world to stock this stuff, getting it on the shelves, getting it in sufficient volume, all that sort of thing. And I think that was the biggest thing. HTC just doesn't have the war chest to take on the likes of them. And then the Chinese guys, it's slightly different. There's a sort of manufacturing efficiency and an incredibly large domestic market where they don't even really need to go abroad to ship tens of millions of
I mean,
units.
Samsung does seem to be maybe a little bit worried at the moment about not having that. I mean, they're trying to get into the software space more, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they have this. Is it Bixby? This
Yeah,
initiative
which no
that
one
is
seems to like.
It's a voice recognition.
Yeah.
thing,
So it's in that sort of Siri,
yeah.
sort of Alexa type of area.
They're sort of desperate to have something to say
Bixby.
there. Yeah,
It's weird, isn't it?
It is
Bixby.
odd, but they're obviously.
Well, I don't know. It might mean something in Korean.
Maybe.
It doesn't sound like it would do, but
It means wasted
Space in Korean.
but was there any sign of HTC trying to do something like that?
No, they don't have the reserves to do it. All they tried to do was make nice phones and hope that would be enough, and I don't think it was.
Yeah.
And I think probably what they're going to do now is try and sort of refocus on
But let's be honest, that's
VR
all
and that sort of
Samsung have really been doing.
what's that?
Making nice phones. I mean,
Yeah.
their software is a bit shit, though, isn't it? I mean, like you said, the Bixby's the one thing they're trying to make themselves out to be a
No
bit
one likes it.
different, and so it's not as good. It's not as good as Alexa or OK Google. They're the ones that are leading from the very front. Siri, I think, is. I mean, from what I've heard and from what I've been reading and talking to people, I don't have an iPhone, so I've got no direct experience with Siri, but it's just rubbish. You got Alexa and OK Google that are just far better software engineers than
But
the
Apple
rest
has
of the
all that
world.
other stuff, doesn't it? All that other good stuff.
Yeah,
I suppose. And I'm wondering if maybe Samsung people sit there in their boardrooms and go, "Hang on a minute, is there a danger that we end up becoming,
definitely.
we're at risk from all these
But they've
low-cost
got the
commodity players."
opportunity because you look at they've got a huge TV business.
Yeah.
They got loads of speakers and all that sort of thing. They could create. I mean, that's what part of what the iLifer thing is, isn't it? Is that you buy an ecosystem of a Mac, an Apple TV, an iPhone, an iPad. You have that ecosystem. Therefore,
But they
you
are
bought
just
into
a
the
hardware
brands.
player, really, Samsung, aren't they? That's the problem for them.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yes.
they make chips, which I think is the thing that's been
They haven't got the
responsible for all
iOS
their
side
growth
of
in
things.
earnings recently. That's the chip business, isn't it? The memory chips that they do.
Yeah.
They do TVs, which
They're
become
quite good
quickly
at they're quite good at
commoditized.
displays as well.
Yeah,
The
which become
OLED,
quickly
OLED pioneers.
commoditized.
Yeah.
Phones.
No, you're
is,
completely right. Because
um,
Samsung's been, in fact, this
they're
is
just a big
directly
commodity.
relevant to the Google HTC story, because one of the reasons Google is deciding, even though when it bought Motorola, it perhaps wasn't ready to do it, which is why that acquisition didn't go well. One of the main reasons Google's deciding to be so proactive in making its own phones, because if you think about it, it's undermining its own Android ecosystem by doing that, which is a dicey thing to do. But it's treating them as sort of hero phones, as sort of exemplars. And one of the reasons it wants to do it is because its main Android licensee, Samsung, desperately wants to be less.
But what's
of a sort of
the
Android
other
platform.
option?
Is there a parallel with Google Fiber?
Sorry, one at a time, guys. The other option to what?
To Android.
What, for third parties? There isn't, but for Google.
So that's part of the reason
Yeah,
that
but
they
what-
feel safe in doing it.
But don't forget what the Android model is for Google. It doesn't make any money from Android itself. It makes money from the fact that by virtue of having Android, I then use Google Search and Google
I
Maps.
know,
and
but
blah,
you're
and blah, blah.
saying they're risking relationship with the other OEMs
Yeah.
by
Well, no, you're right. So they can piss them off on what they're going to do about it.
Yeah.
Totally fair
literally
point.
got no other option.
But it's still not considered ideal business practice to piss off your business partners, is it?
Is it similar to what sort of they were doing with Google Fiber, where
Right.
there was speculation about, they want to be a big broadband operator, but I think it's it's more clear that they just wanted to kind of put pressure on
Right.
the big broadband operators to keep investing in higher speed networks, which would support more Google
Right.
services.
So
And
just put a rocket up their arse a bit.
yeah,
Yeah, it could be that. I mean, I don't think it expects Pixel to be a massive sort of P&L by itself, a massive contributor to the bottom line.
yeah.
It's meant as a sort of exemplar. It's meant to sort of push things along and maybe to show off, because it'll be probably more closely allied. It will get first sight of new Android versions,
Well, they do a lot of this stuff,
which
don't
is
they,
always what it's
Google?
been with Nexus
Yeah.
in the past.
They have a lot of initiatives that aren't big, money makers. They just seem to be to
Sort of
to
defensive.
drive defensive, but also maybe in some ways driving revenues at the main business. More broadband connections means
Yeah.
means more advertising online, more nice smartphones.
Part of me
and-
thinks that they're just a bit, the Google mentality is we'll try things. If it takes off, great. If it doesn't, well, we tried it and we'll have a go
but
another
nothing
again.
has
another time.
taken off from a business perspective, I think all of their revenues still just come
Oh, yeah.
pretty much from advertising.
All this
yeah?
alphabet moonshot
Like
stuff.
Google Cloud, the cloud business, that generates that generates a lot. Like it's still, a
Although they have a
fraction.
tiny share of the market, apparently.
Well, I think AWS, AWS dominates, and I think AWS accounts for what's like 35-40%, and you got like Google and Microsoft on about like 10 to 15 each or something like that. So they're the 2 and 3 player in the market, but yeah, I mean that market is heavily shifted towards AWS.
So it's got cloud and it's got advertising, but all
Yeah,
of
and it
the
tries the odd
many
thing.
other things it does don't actually
I think it
make
sometimes
money for it,
bails
and
on
I'm not
this
sure they're
stuff a
meant
bit.
to.
I think it sometimes bails a bit too quickly. I'm with Jamie. I'm all in favour of these Silicon Valley giants rolling the dice every now and then. I mean, I took the piss out of Amazon when they launched their smartphone, because they launched a smartphone that had nothing exceptional about it. It was incredibly expensive and didn't even run full fat Android, because they'd forked the OS to try and put their Fire OS on it.
Yeah,
And I was just like, who the hell is going to want to buy that? And no one did. And they had to write off billions of dollars. But they sort of went, all right, fair enough. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I think, Google needs to persist with some of these things, maybe with things like fibre. And then it started sniffing around. This is a bit of a tangent. Started sniffing around sort of fixed wireless, didn't it?
yeah.
And all that sort of thing. But I think it's good, and it may well be right. You may well both be right that they do these things never expecting to make any money, but just to sort of catalyse the market and keep everyone honest
Yeah.
and all that sort of thing.
Well, I don't believe that they ever actually intended to become a big sort of fibre operator on a nationwide
No.
basis in the US. I don't think that was ever the intention with Google Fibre. But there was speculation that's what they were trying to do from some quarters. But I think it was all about driving the market forward, really, and seeing what's possible.
So I mean, sort of summing up, one of the things that those last two topics all have in common is that sort of diversification thing. We accept that it's probably in the interests of operators and certain players to get into content when that wasn't the historical strength of theirs, because there's a bit of a land grab going on there. And we accept that it's a good idea for internet companies to roll the dice and try some of these moonshots, as Google calls them, but then they've got to persist with them and be honest, and not put revenue pressure on them at all, which can sometimes be difficult.
That's part of the thing about model, though, isn't it? The alphabet model now, isn't it? You got the search business, which I think this is something the telco should do, because there's this idea that they got with the alphabet model, you've got Google, the search business.
Yeah.
That's where all
cow.
the revenue. That's where they're making all the money, and then they got this bit over here, X Labs or something, whatever they call it, and that's where they do all their nice ideas that might develop into something. So that's where you've got
bubbling cauldrons and crazy-eyed scientists.
Well, there are telcos doing that kind of thing, aren't there?
Well, that's what I think they should do. Is they should separate the business. They should say, right, we've got this commoditized data business over here, data, voice, SMS. Put that over there. That's how we're going to make X amount of million a year. Now, what we're going to do over here, we're going to make a separate company where they're going to investigate new ideas. Investors, you're not allowed to touch this. We're not going to touch the budgets on this or whatever. We're just going to be concerned about creating more profitability and operational efficiencies here, so you're happy and you're getting more dividends. But over here, don't worry about that. That's for tomorrow.
Well, that's the bit the investors are all going to be looking at, though, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean that's where they're going to make
that's
cash
the only
tomorrow.
reason that they're actually under pressure to do this anyway. Because of the kind of growth imperatives.
But they could turn around and say, right, okay, we're losing revenue year on year, but if
they're not really losing that much revenue.
Well, they're not losing that much
growing.
revenue. But we could just say we're just going to concentrate. All we're going to do in this area, nothing to do with investing in new areas. All we're going to do here is just operational efficiency. So we might be shrinking our revenues fractionally every year, but we're increasing profitability by 10 to 15% a year. And just have those two different businesses. That'll keep investors happy.
Sure, and I think to summarise, it's the sort of short-termism. You get companies everywhere, especially public companies, excusing their short-termism by going, well, the city demands this, the city demands that. But I think of all the companies we've been discussing, Amazon is actually the best example of one where for decades investors were moaning about a lack of growth in profits and all that sort of thing, and they just kept reinvesting and reinvesting, and look at the size and power of that company now. Anyone who sat on that stock for 10, 20 years is laughing. So I would like to see more companies do exactly what Jamie suggested. Maybe have a hermetically sealed sort of trying stuff out unit, but they've got to have the courage of their convictions. And when investors are going on the call, how come that idea you came up with is still rubbish? They should just go, as Jamie says, they should just go, shut up, you look at this bit, you leave that to us. Don't you worry your pretty little investor head about it. And maybe if only, this is the VC model, only 1 in 10 pay off.
Yeah.
But when they pay off hugely. So I'd like to see more of that sort of thing. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks a lot for listening. Make sure you join us for the next one.